Good morning, boys and girls. This is Miss Vance from Advance with Miss Vance, and we're going to talk a little bit today about one of my son James's favorite series. He used to love Curious George, that curious little monkey, and this series is written by Margaret and H.A. Ray. This is a husband and wife team, and they were both authors and illustrators. They were born in a place called Hamburg, Germany, so they knew each other as children. And this is kind of their story from Germany to America. Now, Hans left Germany and moved to a place called Rio to become a bathtub salesman after World War I. That was about 1917, 1918, that time. Margaret left Germany to work as a photographer in London at that time, and her job transferred to a place called Rio, which is where Hans was at, and that's where they met and they married, and they moved to Paris, France in 1935 after their honeymoon. Now, since they were both writers and illustrators, the main writer of the stories was Margaret, and the main illustrator was Hans Augusto. That was his name. And they had written several stories after they'd come out of Germany. Now, they had to leave Germany at the very beginning of World War II because they were in danger. They had a bicycle. It was a two-seater bicycle, and they had the transcript from Curious George, which they had written. It was called Cecily G. and the Nine Monkeys. This was the birthplace of Curious George, and all they had was that transcript of Fifi at that time, his name was, and they kept it with them, and they went through places like Bayonne and Spain, and then they came to America. And they escaped just barely. The day that they left was the day that the German army actually came in to Germany. So, whew, they got out just in time. So that's kind of how Curious George came to be, and he has several different stories in his series. Now, Hans passed away in 1977, and Margaret kept their stories alive by continuing to write and illustrate them, and she published several books even after Hans passed away. And then she died in 1996. But we keep those stories alive by telling them to each other. So that's what I'm going to do today. You can find read-alouds on YouTube. There are several on there. You can even see the very beginning. And in the story, there is always a man with a yellow hat. And the man with the yellow hat actually went to a place with a jungle. And that is where he met the monkey, Curious George, and took him home with him, kind of like a pet. And he brought him back to America with him. And the only other recurring character is Curious George himself. He is the main character, so you'll hear his name over and over. There's several different places that you can find the Curious George series. You can find it on Epic. There's 7 books and videos and an audio book. There's there's several on CuriousGeorge.com. There's games and books and puzzles that you will enjoy. PBSKids.org also has games and printables, videos, and an adventure page. The first publisher of the Curious George books was Houghton Mifflin, so you can find the books on HoughtonMifflinBooks.com. You can even find short movies on Hulu and Prime Amazon. So I'm going to encourage you to continue reading and watching these, because you can always learn something from Curious George. Now, our read aloud today is Curious George Goes to the Aquarium. And here's little Curious George. And here's the man in the yellow hat. "Let's go to the aquarium today, George," said the man. And the manager of the aquarium met them at the door. "I'm going to feed the seals now," he said. "Would you like to come and watch?" He took a pail full of fish and went to the seal tank and held up one. And Billy the big seal jumped straight into the air and caught it. George was fascinated. Next, Billy did a twist in the air. George liked the seals, but only a few people were watching. See, this lady's not watching. He's not watching. She's not watching. "The next show will begin at 2 p.m., announced the manager. 2 p.m.? P.m. means past midday, so that means in the afternoon. George went behind the fish tanks. There was a net on a long pole leaning against a tank. George was curious. Could he feed the seals now? He took the net, went to the tank, and dipped it into the water. George caught lots of fish. And just then a guard came by and saw the net in the tank. "What's going on?" he shouted. And he blew his whistle. And guards came running from all sides. "There he is!" cried one. "Somebody catch that monkey!" "Stop him!" shouted another. And they all ran after George. George was scared, and he ran away and headed for the seal tank. And meanwhile, the next show had started. George jumped right into the tank and landed on the back of a seal. "Look, a monkey!" someone shouted. And one seal flipped George high into the air. Another seal caught him. And all the seals poked their heads out of the water. They all wanted to play with George. "How many seals do you see?" "I see 1, 2, 3, 4. They tossed George into the air and took turns catching him. George was having lots of fun. The audience went wild. It was the best show they had ever seen. Look at them. They're all paying attention, aren't they? Finally, George landed on the platform. Ta-da! And suddenly, a guard reached out and grabbed him by the ear. The manager rushed over. "Wait," he said. "Let George go. He was the star of the show." "Can we hire George?" the manager asked. "We'll see," said the man in the yellow hat. "But I think I'd better take him home now." And they all cheered George once more. The end. I hope you enjoyed Curious George as much as my son James used to. And I hope that you are safe and happy and looking forward to a wonderful summer. I love you all, and please take care. Goodbye.